you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, you too. Um, so I want to go over. I told you a little bit about what I want to go over. Mostly stereotypes and stigma regarding mental health. Um, and as I explained, so my English project is actually it's on single story narratives.
Okay.
And one of the best TED Talks I've ever seen was by a woman named, and I'm probably going to butcher her name, but it's by a woman named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Mm-hmm.
Great TED Talk. It's not very long, but she talks about single story narratives, where as a society we tend to group people based on our own personal biases. Like we'll stereotype people, attach stigmas to a certain kind of people, um, and we kind of see it in all aspects of society, whether it be politics, religion, sexual orientation. But what I wanted to focus this interview on is mental health.
Okay.
Um, so you're the author of two books, The Nature of God, The Revelation, and you also have a memoir, When I Thought I Was Jesus, A Story of Mental Illness and Divine Connection. Now, admittedly, I've only read excerpts of either one of these books.
Yeah. And actually, the
to,
second book, When I Thought I Was Jesus, is still a work in progress. I haven't published it yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then you also have a blog on your website, michelledmccann.com.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I have gone over that. It's really insightful.
Yeah.
And also you're a trained mental health professional,
Mm-hmm.
and you've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So you have quite the resume. So first I want to talk to you about your book, The Nature of God, The Revelation, and also your memoir that you're working on. And kind of what kind of audience do you want to reach? What's the goal of either one of these?
Yeah, so The Nature of God, The Revelation is my journey of learning to connect with God and the angels and to channel messages from the spirit realms. And I talk throughout the book about wondering if I'm grandiose and if this is really happening, because when you're diagnosed with a mental illness, one of the markers they tell you is grandiosity, that you think you have a special relationship with God, right? So, so the mental health professionals would tell me that, no, you're not really talking to God and the angels. But there are some that would say that you can believe in angels and that's okay, but you just can't believe, like they sort of put parameters around what you're allowed to believe and what you're not allowed to believe without having a mental health diagnosis. Anyway, but with The Nature of God, I really wanted to, it was my journey of kind of writing my story, but also receiving channeled messages that I wanted to share with others who might be having what I would call a spiritual awakening, because I do believe for some people that mental illness is actually a process of sort of discovering who you are and trying to get into alignment with living the purpose that God has intended for us. And so for some people, it's kind of messy because there's, in my opinion, it's often resulting from trauma. Yeah. So in my personal situation, I grew up in a loving but sometimes very violent home, which some of my family, and I talk about this in the book, some of my family would say that was sort of typical for that day and age, physical discipline and things of that nature. But it was actually quite violent, and I won't get into. I don't want to get into all that, but that's part of the reason why I had some of the experiences that I had that caused me to be labeled with a mental illness was actually I've been diagnosed with PTSD. Yeah. So, and I feel like a lot of people who have mental illness have repressed childhood memories that are potentially coming back up that they just are unaware of. So anyway, so with The Nature of God, I really wanted to channel the messages to provide, they're messages of peace and hope and love and comfort that, that now, even though they say it's the time of revelation, but it's not something to be feared. It's not like what, kind of I don't want to, label anyone as, but some of the very hardcore evangelicals would tell you like that it's a time of doom and gloom. And so this book has messages that it's not that it's a time of rebirth, that we're going through a very difficult, almost like a labor, you know, kind of the butterfly emerging from the cocoon. And what we're going through now is a way of helping us to kind of reevaluate and reassess our priorities, to take care of ourselves, to be who we truly are, to take care of each other, to be more loving, to be more kind, and to do the things that our heart wants us to do. So it's a very uplifting kind of message in that book. And then for the next book, it's going to be a little bit more of my story of mental illness, my journey of being diagnosed with a mental illness, and me, the first many years, you know, following the guidance of psychiatrists, and which, you know, I still see a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I am taking medication now. I was a period of time I was not taking medication, but it's going to be more of the journey of really taking a broader view of mental illness, because I feel like people think of it just as, you know, maybe a genetic thing that was passed down through families, and they don't take the whole, what I'll call a holistic kind of a broader view, that it could be things like trauma related, and there could be a spiritual component where people are trying to figure out who they truly are. So I just feel like it's to broaden people's yeah, kind of like you said, the biases and the stigma that people have about those diagnosed with mental illness. And I think also I am a little bit of a counter to what people view, like someone diagnosed as bipolar disorder, and I have symptoms that could very much be classified similar to schizophrenia, you know, in the sense that sometimes I have very confused thinking, and but I also am a professional, and I, you know, have a master's degree in social work, and I am not practicing as a clinical social worker now, but I still have a clinical social work license should I choose to practice again. Yeah. And I worked in banking, you know, as a professional for many years, and I, you know, taught in a social work program. You know, I'm someone that it's funny. My friend Lisa said, you know, it's not like I have a scarlet letter on me, that people don't look at me and say, wow, she's somebody with a mental illness. You don't think that unless I share with you that sometimes I struggle to discern what's real and what's not, you know? Yeah.
Well, something that strikes me is I've known you for a long time. We'll get into that here in a bit. And like you said, you never struck me as somebody with a mental illness, but you are incredibly revealing about it now, which I think is great, especially in this time and age where we're seeing the prevalence of it more and more, especially this year where people are falling into depression and substance abuse, you know, because of isolation and economic problems and stuff of that sort. But at what point did you start to get a sense or an inkling that, okay, I'm suffering from something?
Yeah. So if I can, I wanted to also first mention about the openness about the mental illness that has come with writing the book, The Nature of God, the Revelation, because, you know, throughout that book, they, you know, the spirit team, I'll call them, Archangel Michael and God, were basically telling me to, you know, working with me sort of slowly to become more open about sharing my story. And I quote in the book, there's a quote that says, your story may be the key that unlocks someone else's prison. Don't be afraid to share it. Right. And so, so I feel like there's a lot of people out there suffering silently, you know, that could benefit from hearing, you know, they're not alone. So, so I think that's an important point that you picked up on. And then, and I lost track of your question, but I felt like that's important to touch base about that.
No, I completely agree. That is very important. And again, we'll go into our past here in a bit, but I find it especially important because I dealt with my own mental health issues growing up. And as I think many more people than we realize have, and I didn't feel open to talk about it. I kind of felt isolated in my own sense. So I think it's really important nowadays to really talk about it openly and realize that we're not alone in our own personal struggles.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, back to my question: at what point in your life were you a young girl, or were you
Oh,
before you started to get a sense or an inkling that, okay, my past traumas,
yeah.
or I'm starting to suffer from something, or I have been suffering, and it's time
Yeah.
to get on this?
Yeah, so it was in September of 2007.
Okay.
And I went for 3 nights without sleeping, and I started to have, what I'll call some confused thinking, a lot of fears around my son dying. And and yeah, I was just kind of spinning a little out of control, what was labeled as a manic episode. And what ultimately happened, and I think it's okay to share this, is that I was telling my husband he needed to run with my son or my son was going to die.
Mhm.
And so my husband was scared, like, he didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. So we ended up calling an ambulance, and I was hospitalized and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, so I was labeled with a manic episode, was put on medication, and kind of went down the psychiatric path of just living with a mental illness.
Yeah.
And what I now know, as I've started to recover my repressed memories, is that my brother, when he was 4 years old, hung himself, which there's questions in the family whether or not that was accidental or on purpose. He was only 4. And I was 6, and so I witnessed that. And so I think, and I had been doing something called EMDR, which is a, a, it's called eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a trauma treatment that I was not using it with a therapist. I was doing it on my own, which was not really a good idea. And I think that triggered this memory without me knowing cognitively what this memory was, but it triggered all of the feelings related to that memory.
Okay.
And so I started to behave erratically. And so, and I'm only sort of putting the pieces of the puzzle together now to know that it was actually a trauma response that I was having that caused me to behave erratically. And what I talk about in my book, The Nature of God, the Revelation, is about like a PTSD veteran. Like, if you think about somebody who's been in Afghanistan and bombs are going off, and they're used to having to, duck to save their life, and so that's their fight or flight response. That's the part of the brain that, is the trigger reaction, right?
Yeah.
So now the veteran comes back and is in a suburban, neighborhood, and there's a Christmas party, and all of a sudden, I said a car backfires, but nobody knows what a car backfiring is anymore. So imagine fireworks go off in the neighborhood, and nobody even is paying attention. It's just a noise, but the veteran is such on high alert. He hears that noise and ducks under the kitchen table, and everybody's like, what the heck is going on? Why is Jim ducking under the kitchen table, right? And so if he's a veteran and somebody said, oh, there were fireworks that went off, you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together and realize, oh, he's not just randomly ducking under the table. He had a trigger reaction that he thought he needed to protect himself.
Yeah.
And so when you put it in context, it actually makes complete sense. But in my instance, I didn't have the context because that memory was so suppressed that it just looked like I was telling my husband to run. And I'm sure that it was probably a situation, because with my brother's situation, and he's given me permission to share this. So it's it is what it is. But ambulance, there was an ambulance that had come. His face was black and blue. All the blood vessels in he did nearly die, and so I'm sure that there was a situation where it was like, you got to run with him or he's going to die. And that was my thought process. Right. So obviously I was putting it under different circumstances, my husband and my son, and I don't know what had triggered it at that particular point in time for that memory to come back. But now I have context for it, but that is how it originally started. So I was hospitalized in 2007. And then I had just started a new job, and I lost my job. So I was so ashamed. I was mortified, that, that they didn't say this, they just said it wasn't a good fit. When they found out, my husband was very open about it, that I was hospitalized, for what was being diagnosed as, a mental illness. But, so we were all just trying to figure out what was happening.
And
Yeah.
that's gotta be such a terrifying feeling. And that kind of, I mean, you kind of touched on what my next question was, the embarrassment, the shame.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel a lot of that at the time?
That was actually the biggest thing that was horrifying for me. The shame that I had always been such a together person, and to lose my job and to be doing these erratic behaviors, and then to be labeled with this illness, which again, now I don't think of it with the same stigma, but at the time I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, I
Yeah.
don't even know what's real and what's not. I'm so confused. And I was still terrified. Like, I didn't know what was happening
Mm.
to me. And it was a therapist that I saw at that point in time who that was the biggest treatment goal for us, was to work on my shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like I said, I went through my own issues over the years. And I mean, I'm only 31 now, but just as recently as a few years ago, I was dealing with alcohol troubles because of depression, and I know the shame of just that
Mm-hmm.
was a huge burden on me. Um, so you're a trained mental health professional.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just to go back a little bit as to how we know each other, I think it was late 90s after my grandma died that you were part of the Big Brothers Big Sister program and
Mm-hmm.
became a mentor to my twin brother Michael.
Mm-hmm.
And I credit you with a lot of his mental health growth because I remember growing up, we didn't have the easiest childhood in the world,
Mm-hmm.
but he was dealing with quite a lot. And like I said, I credit you with a lot of his growth. But our families became quite close, and I would actually argue that you were a mental health mentor to not just Michael, but myself,
Mm-hmm.
my older brother Richie, and most importantly, my mom. Um, and like I said, our families became quite close. And then in 2001, your husband, Steve McCann, donated a portion of his liver to my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that allowed her to live much, much longer. So that's how we know each other. And
Mm-hmm.
it's quite a great story. And I've
Mm-hmm.
always known you as I've always known you. Your family is quite well put together. And that's why I find your story so interesting, intriguing, because I would have never guessed that you had
Mm-hmm.
mental illness. I would have never guessed that you had past trauma like you
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
Um, so what do you think that says about millions of people who are dealing with this suppressed trauma or underlying mental health
Mm-hmm.
issues that are terrified to get
Mm-hmm.
to get treatment because like we talked about the shame, the stigma, the embarrassment of it is
Yeah.
just too much and they just silently suffer.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's really interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking of this image. My friend Lisa sent to me when she was kind of helping me with some more recent struggles I have been going through. And it was a picture of an apple in front of a mirror. And on the one side, the apple, the mirror side of the apple, when you look in the mirror, it looks like just a beautiful red, apple. And then on the other side, when you see the real apple sitting there, not the mirror reflection, there's a bite taken out of it.
Mm,
But it's on the side that people can't see.
okay.
So,
I like that.
yeah, so and I'm actually planning on writing a blog about that, about, that often what's presented to us is not really the full story of what's happening with people's lives. And I would argue that everybody has got, something that they're dealing with that people don't know about, whether it be in our case, like a mental illness or an addiction, or dealing with, a family member who has cancer. And that's, people are more open about that now. But some people, my friend Cheryl talks about how there was stigma with that many years ago. She's a little bit older, and she was saying years ago people wouldn't talk about a cancer diagnosis because it was considered, embarrassing and shameful. And so, yeah, so I think everybody, and I feel like it's part of our, part of being spirit in a human body is my belief, is that we come here to have these experiences of, in my book, the channel message was, contrast, the negative side of energy. So like sort of feeling, things that are not, that are not just pure love, you know? So we come here to have these experiences. And so everybody goes through something, and the degrees may be a little different. Maybe somebody's is a little worse than somebody else's, but it's funny. I've come to say it's not good to compare traumas, because I feel like, you know, to that person, that trauma, you know, is important and is meaningful. And yeah, so I do feel like everybody has something they're going through. Everybody does.
And it's interesting you say that, because as soon as you said it, I was actually thinking I've attended AA to get my own problems under control, and AA or any of the anonymous groups I find to be very helpful mental health programs, because that is one of the first things, and they continuously teach you. You do not compare problems. You do not compare traumas, because it's never helpful. Everybody's dealing with something, so you never compare. But I also think it's interesting, because I write about this in my essay. And once this is all put together, I'll make sure you get a copy of it.
I love that. Yeah.
But I mentioned early on in my essay a little bit about my mom's health problems and her history. And your family's mentioned in there as well. But early on in my essay, where I'm writing about stereotypes and stigmas, I write that my mom had liver cancer. And towards the end of the essay, where I'm kind of concluding everything, I write that she didn't actually have liver cancer. That's just what I told people. Because she actually had hepatitis C, but at the time there was such a bad stigma with anybody who had hepatitis C was a drug addict or a needle user, that I was embarrassed to tell people she had hepatitis C. So I would just say liver cancer. So it's interesting how I think times are changing a bit to where we're becoming a little bit more open about things, and you know, less stereotype is attached. So I want to get into your training as a mental health professional. What made you travel down that path, do you think? Because it seems very fitting.
Yeah.
And obviously your history with my own family, I know you were very good at it, still are, I'm sure, very good at it. But I find it very fitting that a mental health professional is dealing with mental health issues.
Yeah.
What do you think led you down that path, your path in social work and just dealing with people and helping people?
Yeah, I can tell you about that. It's really interesting. I remember very specifically, and I was writing about this recently. And I do a weekly email where I send often channeled messages, but recently my spirit team has been having me write my own story a little bit. And so it was in September of 2001, when September 11th happened, that I had what my friend Meredith said, I had an early midlife crisis, because when September 11th happened, I knew I needed to be doing something to help the world and be doing something different. I was in banking. I was living a very good life. We had, you know, our son Aiden. I was making, you know, good money, living comfortably. And I liked my job in banking. I was good at it. I enjoyed it. I love the people I work with. Some of them are still my lifelong friends, like the friend Lisa I just mentioned. I met her at that point in time. And, you know, living the good life, and it was a great company, and, you know, it was really wonderful. And then September 11th happened, and like, there was like something that stirred in my soul that said, this is not where I belong.
Yeah.
And, but I didn't know where I belonged. And so, so I started doing a lot of soul searching. I went to University of Delaware, and they had a continuing education, program, like adult learner program, and they had me take some interest inventory type personality assessments, and I got some inkling that, you know, I might want to be doing something working with people. And I felt like, and so then a friend had recommended the book, What Color is Your Parachute, which is like a career counseling type of book written by a Christian minister. And so there was a section in that book called "What is the mission in what's your mission in life?" And so part of it is, you know, he talks about, you know, letting the person in on the freeway, and, you know, doing good things for other people, like that's your, you know, your first calling. But your other calling is to do, and there's a couple quotes in there, but essentially to do what your heart loves to do in the place where you love to do it, and that is most needed in the world. And so what came to me was that I love to talk with people.
Mhm.
And so I started to research, like, what could I, like, and talk with people in a meaningful way. And in
Yeah.
particular, what I didn't put my finger on at that point was to talk to people about their feelings. I love to talk to people
Mhm.
about how they're feeling.
Mhm.
And so then I realized I wanted to do some sort of counseling. And so I started to look at what the possibilities were. I networked with people that I knew, and I met with a psychologist. I had talked to social workers, and I just started to evaluate what my courses of action were. And I'll be quite honest, the reason I chose social work was because it was a shorter duration of a degree. I couldn't believe I was going to, leave my job and go back to school. I was making good money and go into debt to get this degree that I was going to come out making less money with.
Mhm.
But I just knew in my heart that's what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And my husband was like, I don't know why you're doing this, but I'll support you. Whatever you need to do. But I think he thought it was a little bit like pretty, out there too. But he's always been very, very supportive of me, which I've been really grateful for. So anyway, but what happened is social work was the perfect fit for me. It wasn't just that it was a shorter degree program, but it's very much about civic engagement, very much about social justice, and the idea of not just serving people who are privileged. And again, not to compare traumas, because there are lots of people with money that have traumas too, but the
Yeah.
idea of people who are underserved, people of color, people who live in poverty, immigrants, things of this nature. So I first went into it thinking I wanted to do like private practice counseling, and then I really just felt drawn to serving more underserved people. So I first worked in adoption, and then I worked for 5 years running a welfare to work program, which was really different than most welfare to work programs. It wasn't just get this person a job at Burger King and get them off the welfare rolls. It was providing group counseling, life skills, career skills, computer skills, one-on-one counseling. It was really treating, and I don't want to say treating, it's not as if they're broken, but helping the person to see how they want to make changes in their life and supporting them to do that. So, and looking at it from the lens of, oppression and, the things that people have faced, poverty, and
Yeah.
helping them to have value in themselves, and it was called Circle for Change. And it was a
Change.
Circle for Change, and it was a women's empowerment group. We did have one man who came through, but for the most part, it was women, and mostly women of color in the city of Chester, Pennsylvania. And so I did that, and then I ended up teaching in this social work program at Widener University where I had worked, and that was my heart. And then what happened was, this was in Pennsylvania, and they sort of changed the rules about what programs they funded. And so they moved to what they call job placement, which was essentially get this woman a job at Burger King, get her off the welfare rolls. And so the types of programs that we offered were no longer funded. So it lost funding, and I ended up being placed, Widener kept me on, and I ended up being placed in the partnership charter school there, working with kids with behavior issues. And at the time, I had done that before, and I just didn't want to do that again. And what I realized now, it was because of my childhood trauma that was very triggering for me, because the violence was often around behavior issues. And so I didn't realize at the time that I was very unhappy in that role, and it was because I felt distressed. So now I know. So I ended up going back into banking, and I worked in banking for about 7 more years, and then now I'm working as an entrepreneur with my own business. So it's Michelle McCann, author and Divine Channel, and now I'm doing sort of spiritual consulting with people and starting to teach workshops about helping people connect with God and the angels, and doing a whole kind of spiritual business. So yeah.
And that's great. I'm sure that is probably unbelievably helpful to a huge amount of people. And I find it unbelievable that that the programs you dealt with in Circle for Change were defunded, because there's no doubt that stuff like that certainly helps everybody, but especially disenfranchised communities like people of color, immigrants, those that are less fortunate. So how do you feel about, because there's no doubt things are changing as far as stigma and stereotype. I mean, I watch the news all the time, probably too much. It's probably not healthy. as far as my own mental health.
Yeah, I don't. I will say I don't watch the news.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm addicted to it, and I really wish I wasn't, because sometimes it just,
yeah,
especially here recently, it just
yeah,
puts you in a slump.
yeah.
But I mean, just this morning I was watching NBC, and they had a long clip on from a doctor who's talking about how they have seen a huge increase in emergency room visits, especially from young people who are going through mental health emergencies and stuff like that. But where where do you see the state of the world? Do you think we're making improvements?
Mm-hmm.
The openness and getting rid of the shame behind it, or do you
Yeah.
think we let it go?
So I don't know, because it's hard, because my own experience, I have worked a lot on my shame, and I feel like I'm in a better place with it. But so I'm not sure if, as a society, we're in a better place with it. I feel like we are moving in the right direction, but I do still feel like there's a lot of people who are in the earlier stages of facing the shame and the stigma,
Yeah.
and and so I don't want to say that I think we're there yet, because I think we have a long way to go. But I do feel like there are a lot of people who are starting to look at, wait a minute, I'm not the only one here. And I feel like that's why I'm sharing my story, and that a lot of people who are mental health advocates are starting to share their stories, because, now we're advocates. We're people to say, you're not alone, and you don't need to suffer silently with this anymore. And I think that, like, you talk about young people, it just breaks my heart, because and it's true for anyone, but I feel like for young people right now, they're so isolated. I mean, we're all kind of isolated right now with what's happening with the pandemic, but in particular, young people, they're at that stage of, development, where they're trying to figure out who they are, and they feel unloved and unlovable. And yeah, and they compare themselves to everyone else looks perfect, and my life is crap, and
Mhm.
of course, we know on social media, not everyone's life is perfect. That's just the picture that is painted. But for young people, that's what they see. They see that apple in the mirror that looks
Mhm.
perfect, and they don't know there's a bite taken out of the backside, and so they look and they think, what's wrong with me that I can't have what they have, right? Um and it's very, I think, harming and isolating. So, but it's great. There's some things that are coming out now. Like at University of Delaware, there's a new organization I had heard about recently called Sean's Place, which was
Mhm.
for a young person who had committed suicide, as I understand it. And the family wanted to provide a place where people could go so they wouldn't feel so alone. And of course, suicide rates are through the roof for young people right now, because they feel so dark and alone, and ashamed, I think, to admit it. So yeah, so I feel like we are opening more, and places like Sean's House and other places are starting to, come out with more to support people, and like even, technology with being able to text a therapist. I know that's not traditional, but
Mhm.
for young people, it's an outlet, and give them, throw them a line. Like, if that's the
Mhm.
line they'll take, like, we'll start with that, and yeah, so I do feel like it's improving, but I feel like we have a long way to go.
I agree, and I make the point in my essay that things like the media, social media in particular, I think have been really detrimental to people's mental health, because, like you said, they see the one side of the apple, they don't see the bite on the other side, and nobody wants to illustrate their problems on social media. They want to
Yeah,
illustrate the great aspects of their life, and you don't see the other side
yeah,
of the apple.
yeah.
So I do think that's been burdensome to a lot of young people in particular. Um, so I imagine you would advocate for more programs, like especially over the summer. In recent months, we've seen a lot of particular men of color going through their own mental health crises
Mhm.
and being killed by the police because of it. And then we've seen a lot of course, just blatant racism related shootings.
Mhm.
But would you advocate for a nationwide system, like some of the programs you did for in Circle for Change
Oh,
and
yeah.
some of these programs at University of Delaware are doing?
Yeah, that would be great. And I realize how dark it is. Let me turn this light on. Sorry, the sorry, you can't see me so well. I didn't even turn the light on, but yeah, so we'll put some light on the subject, right? But definitely, I feel like the, generations and generations of oppression of people of color in particular, and again, not to compare traumas, but that's, it's just watching the news for that family, for any person of color is very traumatic to feel like, it just, so yes, I feel like, yes, any kind of programs that could help support people to not feel alone and to also be able to share their stories, because I feel like it's very healing. For me, writing the book was very, very healing. And I feel expressive arts, things like music and, dancing and, being able inventing and being able to like therapy, talking to someone, but even support groups, to be with groups of other people who are feeling the same thing, like you were talking about AA, and the Circle for Change. It was all, there was individual, but there was group, and the groups were so powerful because women could share their stories and be like, hey, I went through something similar, but this is what helped me. And, but it sounds like for you, this is what helps you. And, it really is powerful how we can help each other, really, really powerful.
I agree. And like I said, in my own struggles with depression leading up to substance abuse, I found the outlet of peer groups, anonymous groups, just group sessions in general, where you're not always getting advice, but it just gives you an outlet to talk about what's going on. And hopefully somebody has some advice for you or some insight for you, but it's not always the case, but sometimes it's just an outlet to get things off your chest without that stigma attached to it, because everybody's going through something. Each one of us has a story. I've never met a perfect person in my life. Kind of horrible story. So I think more programs and more funding for stuff like that would be great.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, like I've been for a while there, I was an active participant in NAMI, National Alliance for the Mentally Ill support groups, and I met someone who's now a good friend, Sue, who is a volunteer, and she's someone with lived experience and runs these support groups. And now her dream is to move into being more of a mental health advocate. And we talk about trying to create this community center. It's Gibraltar. There's this building in Wilmington that's kind of run down. That's an old mansion, and my vision is to create it into this community mental health center that would be holistic in the sense that it would provide traditional things like NAMI support groups and therapy, but it would also have more expressive therapies, and it would have healthy nutrition and being out in nature. And I've been hospitalized at Rockford Center, which is a mental health facility. And there are many things that were good about Rockford. Some of the staff were supportive and the support groups were really helpful. But there was definitely a dearth of nature, poor nutrition. And then it was very much like a churning, like people were in there multiple times. Like you go for crisis care for 10 days or whatever, and then they send you back out in the community, and then they may have you come to some support groups for a few weeks afterwards, but then you're back on your own again. So people come back into treatment because it's they need maintenance like a car. We human beings, we need, and the maintenance for us is loving, supportive, nurturing relationships. And so someone had said to me, how would your center be different than a place like Rockford? And I see it as a place that people could come for their tune-ups, come once a month or come once a week for the rest of your life. If you need to, have the support in whatever way is helpful for you. And I would have it be more, also helping people to assess their interest and their strengths. So doing things like, and it sounds a little off the beaten path, but things like astrology and things like angelic healer, spiritual, readings, and, things that will help people assess, or even personality inventories, things that will help people assess what is their passion, what helps them live the life of their dreams. Because I feel like a lot of times when people are suffering from depression, it is, and I don't want to, there's lots of reasons why people can be suffering from depression, trauma, environmental circumstances. There's so many factors to it. But I feel like one of the big crux issues is that people don't feel like they can be who they truly are, and they can't live the life they want to live.
Mhm.
And so, so helping people to have the confidence to be able to do that and to have the skills, but then also to have that insight into themselves, like what is their passion? Because so many people don't even know, you know? And I feel like when people have something that lights them up, that gives them meaning and purpose in their lives. And that, so in addition to having something that lights them up, being surrounded by people who nurture and support that and say, wow, you want to be a musician. That's wonderful. Because our culture says, oh, you're never going to make any money at that. You know, why would you do
Exactly.
that? But there are lots of people who make lots of money, you know, living their dreams as musicians. And if that's your dream, you know what? Go after it. Do what lights you on fire, you know, and to have a place that says, you should do it. You should go for it. We'll support you. How can we help you? You know? And then when people network and, you know, it's amazing the things that can happen when we support one another. Can you tell I'm all lit up?
Yeah, yes, I can, and I love it because one of the greatest, most helpful things I found, especially in group therapy sessions or rehab groups or anything of that such, is finding a cause greater than yourself, or
Yeah.
finding a spirit or a power or a being greater than yourself,
Mhm.
and sticking to that. And I found my own journey through mental health and substance abuse. I found that to be one of the most enlightening things, because we have a tendency to kind of focus on ourselves as opposed to, I'm not sure
Mm.
how to put it. You know what I mean? The
I
bigger
do.
whole.
I
Or the,
do. Yeah.
and sometimes that could be detrimental within itself. I mean, just
Mm.
focusing on ourselves as opposed to looking at the world, or saying, how does that person feel, or how does that person feel, and focusing on each other.
Yeah, and
Um,
I want to pause you for a second there, because in my
yeah.
estimation, it's both. It
Mhm.
is loving and nurturing and supporting ourselves and what lights us up and what makes us happy. So I think some people would say it's selfish if you if you focus too much on you. But I feel like when we fill our own cup and we feel nurtured and loved and supported and
Mhm.
cared for, and we feel happy in what we're doing, then we can look outside of ourselves and we can say, wow, look, I have these gifts to share. How can I be
Mhm.
helpful? You know, whether it is, you know, working at a bank and making a lot of money and donating it to help people, that, you know,
Mhm.
if you like to be in business, that's great. Or if it's somebody who's, you know, feet on the ground, grassroots, like doing, you know, providing services, whatever lights you up, you know, everybody's got gifts to bring. And
Exactly.
it's a matter of tapping into that. But in order to tap into the gifts that you have to feel good about yourself, you
Mhm.
know? And so I feel like the place to start is to lift people up, you know, and to let them know that they have value and there's something that people see in them that's worthwhile.
That's great. I'm really glad we've gotten to talk about this, and I think it's really important that as a society, or even individuals, we continue to talk about this, because I think it's going to help alleviate some of that stigma and embarrassment and shame, all the stuff that keeps our problems to ourselves, as opposed to,
Yeah.
trying to figure out a good, healthy way to cope with it.
Yeah.
So real quick, I wanted to, and I avoided a lot of questions, simply because I watched your interview with a young woman named Kiana Fitzgerald, and
Hmm.
um, and that's about spiritual awakening. And I thought it was a great interview. So I want to make sure whenever we post this, that there's also a link to her interview with you, because I think it's really insightful to a broader range of more personal, spiritual aspects of this conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and Kiana Fitzgerald, I'm pretty sure she was with a magazine, right?
So she does freelance work, I believe now, and she had been, I think, with a magazine, maybe Vibe. I'm not sure, but she does freelance work, and she's done work for, I think, Rolling Stone and NPR and other places too. That's it's in her, yeah, it's in her history.
Yeah.
I forget exactly, but yes,
Yeah, so I want to make sure, because I love that interview. I think it's
yeah,
like,
it's
yeah, it's a long interview, but it's incredibly insightful. So I want to make sure we also post a link to that when we when we do all this.
She's another person with lived experience. So she was asking questions to kind of help her on her own journey, and she was sharing from her own experience helping me. So it was, it's definitely like, where there's a spiritual leader named Ram Dass who says we're walking each other home. This idea that we're here to hold hands and help each other out. And I felt so good about that interview because she was so open and so transparent about her own journey that it made me feel open and transparent about mine. So it really felt great. And this has been great too. So,
and like I said, it's really eye-opening talking about this kind of stuff because, as I've been doing this essay on single story narratives and stereotypes and stigmas and stuff like that, I'm starting to notice my own stereotypes and stigmas because I mean, just as an example, I'm living with my twin brother right now and in West Virginia, and there's been times where he goes on a cleaning spree throughout the house and I look at him like he's crazy and I just say, "Why are you acting so manic right now?" And then, watching these interviews, doing this essay, and talking more about this, I realize it's kind of an insensitive, rude thing to say. Maybe he's being manic. So, but I really enjoy this. Again, I had not read your book, The Nature of God, The Revelation, yet. How can I get that? How can other people get that?
Yeah, well, for you, Sean, I'm going to send you an autographed copy. So,
that would be amazing.
So I will do that. But if people want to order it, they can go to my website. It's available. They can just Google The Nature of God, The Revelation, Michelle McCann on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble, and it's on bookshop.org, which supports local and independent bookstores. But if they want to go to my website, it's www.michelle with 2 L's, MichelleDMcCann.com. And I have on there links to purchase the book. There's a thing to order the book. And then there's also people can sign up for my weekly email list, which I send out either my own personal writing or messages from Spirit. And then I offer one-on-one readings, and I have offered in the past some workshops, but I'm kind of on a hiatus from that, but I'm going to offer those again in the future. But if people just want to, keep up with what I'm doing, they can definitely check out my website. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that. Yeah,
that's great. And I just opened it up and I realized you actually have your interview with Kiana Fitzgerald posted on there as well. So that's great. So it's been great talking to you. Real quick, your memoir, When I Thought I Was Jesus, A Story of Mental Illness and Divine Connection. When do you expect to have that finished?
Well, so I started it. I'm working with my editor, Susan, and it's kind of I don't know. When I first started working with her, I kind of contracted with her to keep plugging away with it. And then I sort of took a little hiatus from it. And when we first looked at it, we said it's probably going to take a good 6 to 8 months worth of work to finish it. Because it's just, a lot of it's like journaling over the period of, from 2009 is when I started to write about my journey. So it's a lot of journaling over a period of, over 10 years. So it's a lot to kind of go through. So, maybe 6 to 8 months. I'm not sure if it'll take that long, but, and you're kind of encouraging me to get back to it. I kind of had taken a little bit of a break from it. But I feel like it's going to be really important for people. I am actually working on a little piece right now that I may end up doing before I finish the book, which is I have it's called How to Be on Fire and Not Burn Up. Bipolar is beautiful when you stay in the sweet spot. And this whole idea about how being manic can be a wonderful thing as long as you're grounded. And manic, not like being on fire, manic, like you cleaning the whole house can be a good thing, right? Exactly. But if you're cleaning the whole house and whatever, if you decide to blow the house up because it's just too dirty, like that's not good. But yeah, so sometimes, I used to not like to be labeling myself as manic, but sometimes I own that label a little bit more because when I'm just a hair, on the mania end, but if I have it under control, I am very productive. I'm very creative. I publish a lot of blogs. I get my emails done. I produce videos. And I think I sent you the link about famous people who are bipolar.
Yes, you did.
there's a lot of people who are super creative, super productive, amazing people with this illness. And it's because when you're in that sweet spot, you have all this divine, I call it divine inspiration. You just are inspired to do so much. It's powerful. It's very powerful, but you have to also make sure that it doesn't, I'm going to do a speedometer graphic, that it doesn't go too far, too fast, because that's when, you start to burn up and it goes south. So, but anyways,
I love that title, How to Be on Fire and Not Burn Up. I love it. So this is all exciting stuff you're doing, and I really look forward to reading your book and soon to be books, hopefully.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the way your openness with talking about this, because I think it's unbelievably important to a lot of people, including myself.
Well, and I want to thank you, Sean, for your openness, because you've shared that. That's definitely, it helps with it. It's going to make you it is making you a great interviewer, to be open and you prepared some really great questions. And it's been really great. And this is on a personal note, but I hope it can be part of the video. I'm so proud of you for living your dreams and doing this. It just, I could cry. Your mama would be proud.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm honestly proud of you. I'm proud to call you a friend, and I'm proud that you and your family were a part of our lives and remain to be a part of our lives. Yeah. I'm really happy that Michael, he's the one who suggested I reach out to you, and I didn't know about most of this stuff over the years. I just, how's Michelle, how's Steve, how's Aiden, how's everybody doing? And I didn't know about all this until I talked to him about this essay, and he was like, well, you know who you need to talk to.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, it's funny. And Michael and I had sort of lost touch there for a while, and I, things happen in divine right timing. Like, I guess there was a period of time where we weren't meant to be connected, but it's nice to be reconnecting now for sure.
I agree. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, I guess, off the recording, about how to post this and everything, because I know you're recording it on your side.
Yeah, well, here, let me go ahead and turn off the recording, and I'll just, we can thank everybody for listening, and anything else you want to say before I turn off the recording?
I don't think so. Just one more plug, I guess. Michelle, 2 L's, D. McCann, MichelleDMcCann.com. You're the author of The Nature of God, The Revelation, and you can find that book on your website, barnesandnoble.com, Amazon. And I'm sorry, what was the website that's for?
It's called bookshop.org.
Okay. Yeah. And I actually have heard of that one, because I listened to a lot of different authors speak, and a lot of places, or a lot of authors support that website. Because it's really good for local bookstores and stuff like that. But thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. So here, I'll stop the recording and then we can chat.